Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Rioch, the business connector to business in Brazil. Welcome to Talk to Brazil, the business connection, a podcast about business in Brazil and the world. I'm Tom Rioch, an American living in Brazil for many years and known as the king of networking, connecting people and talking from my podcast studio in Campinas, São Paulo, Brazil. Today's guest is Roger Spitz, and he's talking with us today from San Francisco in the United States. Roger Spitz is the founder of Techistential, the global foresight, strategy, and futures intelligent platform. Roger works in an advisory capacity with business leaders worldwide to capitalize on disruption as a springboard to drive value. He is founding chairman of the Disruptive Futures Institute, an educational think tank, and is also an advisor and speaker on artificial intelligence. Roger has also invested in several artificial intelligence startups, has lived and worked in 10 different cities across 3 continents, including Brazil. So with that, hello, Roger, and welcome to Talk to Brazil, the Business Connection.
Hey, Tom, how are you? Fantastic to be with you this afternoon.
Well, thank you, Roger. You have a very deep and profound understanding of the future, and that's what we want to talk about a little bit. But as you know Brazil well, something about the Brazilian mindset, I'm sure. But in my years here, I found that disruption has become a way of life in Brazil. And for years, business leaders trained themselves to spin on a dime, as we say. Always being reactive, right? And every day was a new day, but not necessarily a better day. From your experience, are there quick fixes to the springboards? Is there a quick solution to getting out of this disruption?
Yeah, so I like the way you put the question. And I often think of Israel and a term they use, which is a fantastic term, which is balagan. And there's an author, Inbal Ariely, whom I love, and she's a friend of mine, who defines balagan as a state of chaos with a promise of opportunity. and they often use that term for the state of mind of, children, entrepreneurs, but innovators alike, where actually it's a driver to innovation, and where something might seem impossible, but they think outside of the box and break things and fail and pick up and tinker and try and actually manage to succeed in doing the impossible. And so I guess the question is whether you just have the state of chaos or whether you have the state of chaos with the promise of opportunity. And I agree with you. Over the years, as I've seen Brazil, for me, it is a phenomenal promise of opportunity. It's definitely a bit of chaos. But I'm actually very positive about the outlook. I don't think it will be immediate, and I don't think it will be easy. Mm-hmm. But I think that in a way, Brazil is little by little pushed more and more into sort of a very difficult, area, which almost extreme in terms of, social, economic instability, some of the political undertones, that there's the hope to wake up out of this in a very positive way, primarily for 2 reasons, actually. One is that it has done so well and it is actually very strong in many areas. It's just a little bit not always known to the outside world, and we can talk about that. So one is that the potential is there, which is a good starting point.
Right.
And we can talk about exactly why. But the second thing is a bit more of a funny one, which is actually, I think that in tomorrow's world or today's world, which is more complex, where there is no right answer, where there are unknown unknowns, where you need to basically innovate by being creative, by improvising, where you're experimenting, where you're testing things, tinkering, that actually you can be better off in a state which is a little bit more improvised or balagan, quote unquote, and take the positive spin on that than if you're too, like some certain countries or in Asia, which are very good at following rules and very rigid, but where basically you can't rely on specialists anymore. You can't rely on knowledge-driven education. You can't rely on those things. And so the kind of slightly more experimental, improvised mode leads itself to actually phenomenal things if it's used with the right kind of inspiration in a more complex world. So maybe I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt, but that's the future I would like to see, which actually leverages on this kind of chaos with this kind of promise of opportunity.
Now, but I think your comparison is valid, and I agree with you, because I've also interviewed a number of persons here from Israel or who have dealings with Israel's probably the most innovative country in the world. And the comparison we have made during those conversations, in terms of geography, physical size, Israel has very little, but they've done a whole lot. Brazil on the other side has so much, so big. And I can see from the Israeli side, they're able to take this creativity, as you mentioned, the innovation, and scale up in an orderly fashion.
Yeah.
Brazilians, and my view here is that you do have opportunity, you have the creativity, you see a lot of things happening. But just as you mentioned, this springboard to scale up, to take a great idea and take it forward seems to be the challenge. How do we get over that?
Yeah. So it's an interesting word, scale up, right? Because there are two ways of looking at it. Indeed, one is the bringing the idea to something concrete and productizing it and that, which is obviously pretty key. And I see what you're saying. It's not always been the easiest in Brazil. But the other way of looking at it is also to think that because of its size, Israel, and for all its phenomenal successes, commercially, in the true sense of scaling, which is achieving a certain degree of commercialization and success and that, it relies on countries outside of Israel, such as the US and other countries. And therefore, the question for me when I think of Brazil is if you have enough of the spark, you actually have such a big market and such an interesting market in many ways that maybe you don't need to be maybe as creative or crazy in terms of breakthrough innovations as Israel, but at least you have the benefit of the market. So when I look at areas, and 200 million people is what? It's probably the sixth largest country in the world. So you're quickly, after China and India, you have the US with probably 300 or so million. And so Brazil is pretty much up there, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have leadership, and AI relies on data, obviously. And Brazil is, you know better than me, but pretty savvy, to say the least, with social media, with digital media, with fintech, with all these areas. And therefore, that feeds quite well into AI and certain other areas like ag tech or other things where Brazil is cutting edge. So I think if they kind of can just get halfway through the balagan and the opportunity of entrepreneurship and get that creativity, the ingredients are there because they're cutting edge in so many different sectors, so creative, so strong,
right?
And there's a large population to leverage on that, especially in areas where size matters, like AI and for the data sets and the scale. So I'm quietly confident. I guess the question is, how bad does it need to get for there to be a wake-up call, and how much of a wake-up call is it, as opposed to just thinking, oh my God, it's just the end and it's the puts,
No, but I agree with you. When you look out into the world, and where everybody's always talking about a global presence, many companies here in Brazil, obviously look along the agricultural side. Agriculture is very strong. Brazilian products exported almost everywhere. Brazil is called the breadbasket, and rightly so. A lot of investment, a lot of technology, a lot of investment. We see harvesters here that basically, we're talking about artificial intelligence. You're seeing high mechanization, high impact from technology. Where I've seen the operator of harvesters, he actually uses the time sitting inside the harvester to learn. He doesn't need to do anything. He's really just there as a passenger. And part of that, the company's training these people really because they need to upgrade the quality of the persons. The machinery is here, the technology is here. That is happening rather quickly. But other segments, I don't see the same thing happening. And Brazil, obviously, it is the breadbasket people need to eat. But if we don't spread that out a little bit, I think that could be the challenge of the future.
Yeah, I mean, one area I talk a lot about. In fact, I was with a specific organization in the sector only earlier this week in Brazil. Is really education, and I think ultimately, a lot of these things are not, unfortunately, quick fixes and short term, right? And so it really starts with education and the role you give youngsters and the mindset the youngsters have for change. And again, coming back to Israel, when they had their own existential crisis in the 90s around, what's next and the geopolitical considerations and the need to be important in cybersecurity and cryptology and that. At the end of the day, they didn't have that. And it was just the very early days of these things. But they knew that technology needed to be developed, and it would be developed by basically young citizens, right? Kids in the 18, 19, 20, who'd move into some of the intelligence services. And what's fascinating is that ultimately, and that's just a 5-year duration, those programs, and then they move out to do other stuff. And so, within a matter of years, these youngsters, it's not only them, but were a huge driver to turning basically an entire country into a world leader in an area which is not only beyond cutting edge like cybersecurity, but also changes every second. And so it's kind of that mindset which, I'd love to just see the education system and, why not in Brazil? If enough people kind of have the wake up call and they change the mindset and you sort of have the new generations, understand that we're in a complex world, which is less linear and what that means and develop the right skills around that, there's no, exclusivity as to where good ideas can come from, right?
Right. Well, you mentioned that education again, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about the Disruptive Futures Institute, and your focus there is education, right, as a think tank.
It is.
On one side, you're an advisor, and on the other side, you're a teacher.
Yeah, no, it's thanks for asking, because it's an interesting one. It happened like many things accidentally. I spent 20 years on, working in investment banking, and at some point felt that it was interesting to move on. And I imagined a portfolio where I'd sit on some boards, do some advisory work, write a book, which I'm doing, just spending a bit of time, speaking, doing different kind of activities, and just taking a step back from a kind of more structured environment and corporate world. And when I started doing that, and it's quite recent, I only left, I've been maturing this idea for some years, but I only left, less than a year ago, full-time employment in quite a demanding environment. But when I started talking about some of these topics, and especially over the past few months with the current health crisis, I realized the extent to which there was a need for these topics to understand better what's happening, what tools do you have to address it, how to deal with it. And this interest came from not just leadership teams, but even youngsters. I did a podcast this weekend with kids in Cupertino wondering, what should I be studying given disruption? Right. And interest from places like India or Malaysia, and also all kinds of age brackets and all types of background. And so I actually decided from that the world kind of needed a better understanding of these topics. And it's a little bit of a bullshit bingo word. Disruptive, it's a hyper used word, but for want of a better word, I just felt that it was an environment which, is not linear, not predictable, and not stable. And so I think that's the world we live in more and more. And I think some of it is technology like AI, some of it is other societal or other influences. And I just felt that I'd been thinking about these topics for quite some time, myself going through a lot of learning, and what was the best way to maybe feed that back? And so I decided to have that platform. Some of it will be very democratic and free content to try and help people understand better these issues and hopefully provide some tools. Some of it might be geared more towards executive education or other things. But the fundamental need was that I just simply perceived, a lot of people all over the world with basically a necessity and a thirst to understand these topics better and to understand how it affects them and what do they do about it.
Well, I think that's fair, because my feeling is exactly that we've been trained to get out of the comfort zone, but once you get out of it, then what do you do? And if there isn't any planning, if there isn't any thought about doing that, and many times the disruption that the world is going through right now, that wasn't planned, it happened. And then everybody is just running around, and I think that has been the stimulus for the whole world right now. It's sort of like everybody sticking their fingers in a plug and getting shocked and not trying to figure out what to do. And there are positive answers to that. And I think people are looking now. I think, the comfort zone is all gone everywhere. I think that's been taken off the board. Right. And so I think the disruption has happened, but the word futures now. Now we really do have to look at the future in a more structured way.
Yeah.
And so that's the drive. So you do feel that happening. Is that, now you mentioned that for the younger people, but C-level, when we're talking about the corporations that you've had all of your experience with that, some move rather quickly and others move very slowly. How do you, and today you're talking about the artificial intelligence, and you had an article that I read that you sent me recently about decision making, right?
Yeah.
And one of the headlines there was, strategic decision making, the future of strategic digit making, and then decision making, no longer human exclusive.
Yeah.
So where are we with that at the C-level?
So different aspects to that, but there are a number of elements and filters where I try to look at AI. Obviously, it's, it affects all of us and we're all interested in the topic, or some more or less. But the area I had spent indeed quite some time on is really strategic decision making, just by virtue of my job. So I spend time with, generally decision makers, CEOs, boards, C-suite, shareholders, in terms of, what their next strategic moves might be and all that. And so as I started thinking about the world with my new hat, in terms of, looking a bit more to the future and maybe longer time horizons, I was interested in thinking, what is the future of AI and the future of decision making? Because in a way, it's quite interesting. So, stating the obvious, AI is moving more and more in the value chain in terms of being able to make decisions. It, used to be just automation, then it's augmentation, then it's also creativity. And today, AI is better in what we call the complicated world, where there are known unknowns, where there's some cause and effect, and where there's a range of right answers. And so they can use data, have pattern recognition, and they're quite, good at that. But they're still not good. Neither are humans, I think. But they're still not good in the complex world, which we defined earlier as there being no right answers, right, unknown unknowns, and less obvious causality. And then I was thinking, okay, AI is learning fast, and they may or they may not be able to manage the complex world and decisions, but the humans should be able to do that. And the issue with humans is that it relies on a number of things which are not the way a lot of companies or individuals are capable to think. One is really understanding what exponential is, especially for technologies.
Right.
And that's tricky to process, how quickly it can hit you, but only at the end. It's gradually, then suddenly. It's what we saw with COVID, right? Something can double every day, but for the first, 80% of the time, it's almost not visible. And so the question for organizations is, and individuals and leaders, is how do they make sure that they stay relevant in the decision-making value chain? And so I'm not sure today how good a job they do. I often use some of the terms I borrow and the frameworks from Nassim Taleb around fragile and anti-fragile. Right. And I still find a lot of organizations and leadership teams are centralized, hyper-optimized and hyper-efficient, following the nice McKinsey reports, but they do all these things which have theoretical value, like you shouldn't have cash on your balance sheet because that's inefficient. So last year, the world did almost $1 trillion worth of share buybacks so that they can give a 5-minute impetus to their share price.
And everybody's looking for cash.
Exactly. And today they're kind of thinking, well, I just kind of burnt, $700 or $800 billion last year collectively. Right. And so it's all these things, which is, what is the difference between a company which is fragile or the opposite of fragile? And I think a lot of that to the question around decision making is actually the assumptions that are made in making decisions, the profiles of people in terms of how anticipatory is a leadership team, how anti-fragile, and how agile are they in navigating a more complex environment. And if they're not doing a good job at that, basically AI, which is learning fast, at some point might they kind of become a bit more obsolete? And that's really my question.
But I think that all wraps together, because what I see here in Brazil anyway, in meetings and with business persons, I'm a member of the American Chamber here, and obviously many meetings here before, even during this. Now we're in virtual meetings. Mm-hmm. But part of the impact really comes from that. And what I see more often, people talk about when the decision-making process is based on the past.
Yeah, that's exactly the issue.
And what you're saying is that we need to talk about the future. So how do you, I don't want to say forget your past, but how do you stimulate the future? And how do you get people around the table, the decision makers, the 3 or 4 or 5 directors that you have, the CEO, to talk about tomorrow without referring to yesterday? Because everybody says, well, in the past and, whatever.
Yeah.
And that seems to be what's happening. And people can't get over that hurdle of the past.
Yeah, no, you're so right. And that's where I really always try and make that distinction between, what is a complex world. And, it's Stephen Hawkins who considered the 21st century to be the world of the century of complexity, and which again, there is no causality in the same way, or it's not as straightforward as complicated. It's more like the Amazon River. It's the distinction between, so complicated is Petrobras, they're going for an oil exploration, you look at different experts, they opine, you go for it, and you can rely on things. It's pretty, you have known unknowns, you have the right answer, you can rely on experts, etc. Complex is more like the Amazon River. Everything is interconnected. If you move one thing, it moves the other. You need emergent behavior, because as you do something, you realize the impact it has on something else. You can't predict it. And so one of the challenges, whether you talk about it in terms of being the future or ability to navigate complexity or what have you, it's ultimately the same thing, which is you use the word predictability, which is you can't predict it. Mm-hmm. And therefore, it's not linear, it's not stable, it's not predictable. And that's contrary to that, it's complex or it's exponential. And that indeed requires you to think about the future, not in the way of thinking you might be able to predict it, but in the fact that you need to imagine alternative plausible futures, which are not the current ones you know and have known.
Right. Well, you made me referring to the have you been to the Amazon? Have you seen the river?
I haven't. No, I use it as a case study. Oh, actually, I have, but I haven't visited it. I've been kind of close.
Well, no, I want to use this because what you just mentioned, it clicked on me. There are 2 rivers that come together in the Amazon basin. One is sort of blackish in color, the other sort of brownish. All right, and this is a tourist attraction. People go there to see where they meet. They flow for miles and miles and miles, and they don't mix. Mm-hmm. And so what you're saying is a little bit of that maybe we need to have things mix faster to bring the past and the future together quickly, because if things take miles to mix, that's a problem. And the future is on us every day. Before, the future used to take some time to get here, but it's happening right now while we're talking.
Yeah, I love your analogy. And I use more and more the term liminality, which is, normally used for the in-between state or stage of things. So before it might have a certain configuration, and then you have a liminal, maybe slightly blurred in-between state, and then it becomes a sort of more defined after that. And I kind of use in my talks the analogy that I think liminality is here to stay. In other words, there's a continuous blurring of zones. You're not going to come out from a kind of before and after COVID. You have what's human or what's not human, right? You have what's artificial or what's real or what's fake. What's your home versus what's the office. What's real meat versus alternative meat. Right, so I use this term liminality, which is exactly, it's a beautiful analogy. I might use it, which you've just used, Tom, around that. You can't just wait to have clarity, or you can't just wait for things to pass, or you need to constantly, and that's to coming back to the leadership question and decision making and then versus AI. If you're not agile enough to understand that there's interdependencies and that it's unpredictable, to understand that you need different perspectives to experiment, to try and fail, to tinker, to test, as opposed to having a big centralized structure and various other configurations or some theoretical models that assume X, Y, Z. Ultimately, it doesn't necessarily kind of help you in today's environment, right?
So today, the word you just use, agile, you need to be quick.
Need to be quick, but it's especially responsive, right? So for me, the way I use agility is indeed there's a speed element, but speed not in the sense that you have to rush, but in the sense that you have to develop what is called emergent behavior. So you need to amplify things that are working and that seem to be getting you in the right direction. And on the contrary, you need to dampen some behavior that you feel are not helping because there's no right answer, because it's not predetermined.
Right.
There's no direct cause and effect that you can know beforehand. Ultimately, the emergent and the agile, I use it in a sense of kind of testing and trying and seeing where it goes, because you can't just sort of say, oh, I've got the guide, this is what we need to do, we're all good. You're going to have to sort of test it there and then. Mm-hmm. So there's a speed element, but there's literally an agility in the sense of emergence, if that measures.
So you're redefining fail fast.
Yeah. And also, I actually like to redefine fail, because for me, if there are no right answers, what is fail, right? Because you have to experiment and you have to have an environment which allows you to experiment, because that's precisely it. You don't know necessarily what will work or what won't work beforehand. And so that's where it's so important to have people who can figure things out. And that's why Brazil, there's a lot of hope, because one thing about the Brazilians is that they're very agile in ways around getting around a tricky situation or innovative. No, but seriously,
I agree with you. I agree with you.
It can be helpful.
One of the words that I learned when I first came here, which at first I couldn't understand it, the meaning. In Portuguese, it's a word called jeitinho.
For sure. It's exactly that. You're
right. But jeitinho, when you come here as a foreigner, the American come here, and they go, jeitinho, dá jeito, and we'll find a way. And, that sort of frustrated me, because everything was a jeitinho. I said, what is the process of a jeitinho? But Brazilians do have that. That's a process-oriented way of doing things. That's just part of the way of life here.
Yeah. But you see, that's exactly why I think you could harness that in the same ways you can harness the chaos of the balagan. Mm-hmm. It could be that you turn it in a way that is actually a driver to kind of innovation and to change. Because in ways that is more valuable than just being a good, obedient learner and soldier and do what you said. So it's just kind of making that move from the slightly more independently minded mindset and, jeitinho, as you say, to have it fuel kind of innovation and different kind of initiatives, which maybe are more strategic than just the day-to-day.
Well, then, back, you feel good coming here then, right? You feel at home.
Oh, I love it. But of course, like everybody, I would love to see these changes, right? I'm not blind to the challenges for so many different people, for the missed opportunity.
Right.
And that's where I would, I love it and I embrace it for all its features, but I would love to kind of see Brazil really, rise to the challenge of its full potential.
Well, there I agree with you. And I think the root of that, what needs to happen is education. And you have to start early, start fast, start big.
Yeah.
And maybe that, and, talking about artificial intelligence, talking about the new technology and the younger generation, they're so agile in using this. Mm-hmm. And I think that my feeling to the future is that will be the platform, because people will be educating themselves. If the government can't do it, what they will be using is some type of a device in their hand or on the wall or in the refrigerator or somewhere, and they will find ways to better themselves. And that's happening right now. And you can see a lot of startups, a lot of things coming about here, and I guess you have seen that here. And the COVID has just highlighted that.
Yeah.
It just made everybody go out and try to find a way, and part of that is happening.
Yeah. And, even just on the point of education and that, I think, there's an aspect to your point, which is fantastic, which is you could argue that with 5G and with everything being online pretty much, that there's no difference in terms of the information someone in a remote area of Brazil can get. at the fingertips compared to if you were a Harvard professor, right? In terms of the information itself. And there are some phenomenal, startups and ideas coming out. And, over time, I think this more complex world will mean that you won't be able to just tick the box and do this or that degree or this or that path and have a predetermined outcome, which means that, I think that for those who we need to fuel that idea of agency and initiative and building your own life, and not and hopefully a lot of that will come through structured education that's kind of reframed in the right way, but hopefully a lot of that is also mindset irrespective of whatever education in the broadest possible sense of life learning.
I agree with you there. I think this will be, and back to what you said, the minimally, it will be self-centered now. People can learn that the tools are there, they have to apply it. They just can't wait for somebody else to do it for them. Well, Roger, I want to thank you. We're coming to the end of our time, unfortunately, because there is so much to talk about. I really enjoyed our chat. There's so much about the future. The future is long, and it will be there. And I really thank you for sharing your time with us and our audience, okay?
I loved it. Thanks for having me, Tom. Amazing.
Well, hopefully maybe someday we'll see you here in Brazil once you get down here, or virtually, all right?
Look forward to that. Look after yourself, Tom.
Okay, and for our listeners, you can find more about Roger Spitz, and his name is Roger, R-O-G-E-R. Last name is S-P-I-T-Z. You'll find him on LinkedIn with the name Roger Spitz. And also you find him at the company, which is Techistential. That's TECHISTENTIAL.AI for artificial intelligence. Or you can visit our site, talktobrazil.com, and find more information and other links as well. All of our previous shows of Talk to Brazil are also available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. I'd like to thank you, our audience, and our sponsor, Focus MI Market Intelligence. Focus MI specializes in market research for the Brazilian agriculture market. And more about them on their site, which is www.focusmi.com. That's focusmi.com. Remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Thanks for listening to Tom Rioch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.